Добрый день. Приветствуем вновь
Good
всех.
afternoon. We are very happy to welcome again all the Russian case guests. Welcome all, dear colleagues. Thanks for joining us today. And the interpretation is already on. Thank you very much for following us on social media. Today is the 6th of April, and this is the final event of the Russian case, the traditional showcase of the Russian theater, which began this year on the 1st of April.
Смотреть запись.
And until midnight, all our foreign colleagues will still have the access to all the performances uploaded on the platform.
На этой
So you
встрече.
still have the whole day, besides the two events which we're hosting now and the evening party. We have mailed out the
Знаешь, что все
invitation
предыдущие
to that party. Just a quick reminder that the recording of all the previous events is available on the Russian Keys platform with simultaneous interpretation. This could be useful for those who could not join us in these conversations in real time. Please don't forget to submit your questions through the Zoom chat.
какие-то вопросы или темы останутся неохваченными, то мы потом их зачитаем.
And we will look through the chat and we will incorporate any questions or comments you may raise. After we stop the broadcast on social media, we will stay here on Zoom and we will continue the discussion in a more informal manner. So I'm happy to pass the mic to Marina Davidova, moderator of our today's meeting and the Russian Keys curator. She will present today's guests.
Спасибо.
Добрый день. Ну да, мы проводим сегодня
Good afternoon, everyone. This is indeed the final, the sixth discussion, which is part of the Russian Keys program this year. And I think this is the richest program of the Russian Keys for the whole time of its existence. We're hosting public talks in which we try to, or at least I try to formulate the topics for them to touch upon the most burning questions of contemporary theatre. And as a final touch, today we will have a conversation about horizontal and vertical theatre. We're going to talk about the figure of a theatre director. We're going to discuss the job of the theatre director, which for the past century was a dominating figure in the theatre landscape. This is a fact. And for me, the very fact of this kind of horizontal theater, where all participants are equal to each other, and which does not have any single or dominating will of a director, the fact of the emergence of this theater, for me personally, raises a lot of questions. Maybe we are heading towards a new type of theater, which has this single will of a demiurge, of a creator who imagines the world, who imagines the theater world according to the laws that the creator sets himself or herself. In the course of all the previous discussions, we used
говорю
the other term post-drama. Yesterday, for example, this term was used a lot. we have to admit that drama theater and post-drama theater is anyway the theater that sets the ground for contemporary arts. And I think that this theater hinges on famous names. And though I formulated the question um, thinking about directorships, about directing, but maybe my question is even broader than that. Will the theater of tomorrow be the theater of big names, of famous names? And as for these famous names, these could be dramaturgs, these could be composers, not just directors. So I think I will reformulate the question now. I will make it even sharper. Do you imagine the future history of theater as a history of such dominant, important names? Or do you rather think that this way of theater production, this new way, which hinges on the quality of the participants, do you think this is the future of theater? And ethical conventions matter, of course, here too. This is just a question to stir our discussion, to begin our discussion. We have 4 participants today. We have Boris Pavlovich with us, Ilya Moshitsky, Ada Mukina. Ada, are you connecting from Germany? Yeah, from Germany. In a few minutes, hopefully, Andrei Moguchi will join us too. I think that this panel is great for this discussion, in my opinion.
Поколение Андрея Могучего.
We will have Andrei Moguchi, who represents this kind of image of a director who's a demiurge. Ilya Moshitsky, I think, also works in that line, but he represents the younger generation. Boris Pavlovich tries different ways of theater, and Adam Mukina has personal experience of taking part in horizontal projects. So we tried together here very different people with very different theater experience, and hopefully this meeting will help us clarify things. Okay, so now I'm turning to our speakers. I'm not going to call out your names. Please feel free to volunteer. Hopefully, when Andre joins
Он
us a bit later, we will introduce him and our talk as smoothly as possible. Okay, so the floor is yours. You're most welcome to speak. If that is okay for you, I would like to clarify one thing. One thing about the term horizontality. When I discuss this verticality versus horizontality debate, foreign colleagues very often do not understand me. I think that the Russian theater has a kind of a confusion in the use of the term. For example, the term the horizontal theater is used in different meanings. The first meaning is related to hierarchies. So there is a main person or a main group of people who make decisions, who have the right to make decisions. So this is vertical theater. And there are also horizontal groups where the decision making is distributed. But very often the groups that in Russia call themselves horizontal are not really horizontal. Even if we look at today's discussion, I don't think it's horizontal because we have a moderator, we have a curator of this discussion who invited us. So Marina chose who will have the right to talk about it. She formulated the topic. We didn't choose her as the moderator, we didn't select her. And as for the hierarchy, we can see another woman above Marina in the hierarchy who presented the guests at the very beginning. So there is a certain hierarchy in this discussion. But there is a second meaning to the term horizontal theater, and I think it is a synonym to collaborative theater. So co-creation, co-production. This is a more complex form of authorship where different artists, a few directors create something together. And this is also related to another English term, device theater, which uses different materials equally. So it's not text-centered. It can be about movement, text, music. It all becomes a kind of a melting pot, all creating an art piece. At the same time, collaborative projects can be not horizontal. For example, when we made the Locker Room Talk, a show in the Meyerhold Center, we were four, a director, a dramaturg, a choreographer, and we invited other artists to do certain work which we did not have skills for, costumes, for example, or set design or light design. So in relationship to these invited artists, we were the bosses. So we set the tasks. The project was about collaboration, but it wasn't horizontal. And the third meaning, which I see in the Russian context, especially when I hear people saying, I want theater to be more horizontal, what they actually mean, they want more respect and more partnership in in the production process, especially in big institutions, because the Russian theater still has this boss serf relationship, like, okay, you don't like it here, we will find your replacement. So when people say we want more horizontality, it doesn't mean that they want to destroy hierarchies. They don't want anarchy. They want to do their job, and they agree that some other people have more authority, more resources, more responsibility, but they want to be treated as human beings, basically, as partners in this shared business. So I think there's three meanings very often intertwined. I prefer the term collaborative theater, so the theater of complex authorship, when there is no single main figure who dominates in the production, like Lena Kowalskaya says, when everybody supports or serves the director in the idea. I will answer now that Tamara and I are not in any kind of hierarchical relationship. That sounded funny. Tamara is not any kind of a boss for me. We just perform our very different functions in this collaboration. So we are not in any kind of vertical relationship. And this is fun that from a side you see it like this. This is an aberration that happens very often, misreading the situation. You use some terms from the English language, from the British theater. As far as I understand, the British theater is a kind of an island if compared to the European, to the continental theater.
Использование разных терминов.
So I think using different terms is not different for us and Germany. So, for example, when we made an issue of the theater magazine about the social theater,
Словами иногда
we
видите,
showed that the same things are called different names, and sometimes the same words mean different things in different theaters in different countries. So now we are trying to discuss the terms. By the way, Andrei Maguchi has joined us. I can see him. I think we will not disturb him now. He will join whenever he feels comfortable. Ilya Moshitsky, would you like to jump in? If I understand you right, you're a person who lives in St. Petersburg,
Из вот этого самого мира
and you talk a lot with people from this world of horizontal theater just because in St. Petersburg there are more collaborative teams, more than in Moscow. It so happened historically. At the same time, I believe that you're actually representing a completely different type of theater. The performances that I saw from you were created with your own will, with your fantasy, with your imagination. How do you feel in this change in reality?
гуманистических или наоборот в каких-то
And
очень приятельских отношениях.
are you supporting the situation or yes, I'm quite comfortable with this situation. My relationship is quite comfortable. My stance is quite comfortable towards that. And I also feel that I am changing personally. And I think this is good. This is good to be changing. And this process of horizontalization, I'm
Но
not
мне кажется,
sure. It's both an ethical issue and aesthetical. Of course, there are different qualities to it. There is a very beneficial process in it, fighting the feudalism, which we observe everywhere, where the figure of the director was subject to myth. I mean, sometimes people who don't have any rights for that stir up scandals, punish others, humiliate others, behave in a feudal manner, really. Just recently, for example, I was witnessing rehearsal process in one of the theaters. He was just humiliating all actors for 2 months. And I think it's left its trace on the production. The production was very gloomy, so to speak. I think this kind of humiliation should be made unacceptable. And this is good that this is changing. On the other hand, this fashion has another side to it, like that everybody absolutely have to deny their nature, become very
то есть все эти
communicative, very tolerant with each other. So all of these principles of collaboration have to be a perfect
я на
fit
самом
for
деле
everyone. I think it's a heresy too. As for myself personally, I try to choose the midway. It's just basically fighting idiocy for me. I mean, a good performance cannot be made from traumatizing people, from turning people into animals, humiliating them just because of your own will. I don't think it's any kind of good ground for theater.
не находишь в людях соавторов. Ну, на самом деле тут способы могут быть любые. То есть вот движение к соавторству любыми
You
способами.
have to see people as co-authors. So I guess that moving towards co-authorship is the future. Ilya, you were talking now about the feudal design of theaters, and this is completely true. In many places, in many cities, especially in provinces, the theater is quite feudal.
Моим поколением критиков, да, и
And
я ясно
for
против
example,
этого.
my generation of critics wrote a lot about that, and I have always been fighting against this feudalism, this type of theater, which is set as an estate where serfs and the boss, the landlord.
Некий внутренний протест против такого типа
But
театра, он
I think a kind of an inner protest against such kind of theater is a kind of plusquam perfectum. This is so evident that people, whoever they are, directors, or anyone, they just cannot humiliate others. They cannot abuse others. This is impossible. It goes without saying for me. Like, there is nothing to discuss here. Well, I mean, there is nothing to discuss here, but there are particular cases or some places where it's all going on, where it's still happening.
Учаться, так сказать, кричать, указывать нам, как журналистам и критикам, об этом писать и говорить. Но я не вижу здесь никакой настоящей проблемы, да, потому что мы знаем, что это плохо, и мы знаем, что это плохое надо искоренять. Вот. Но и я знала
I
это.
don't see any problem here as such. I mean, yes, it is happening in some places, but it is a pity. There is nothing to discuss here. When we say horizontality now, we do not discuss the fact that some people have the right to humiliate others. Rather, it's about this kind of wheel. Who is the author? Who is the author of the performances? Is it possible that one person comes up with a show, comes up with the idea, and everybody else will support that? You, for example, Ada, are you ready to work in these hierarchies even when you're not humiliated? Even in our conversation, I think you quite nervously reacted to the fact that we have a moderator in our discussion. No, it was not nervous. I don't think that verticality, by the way, somebody in the chat has asked to quote examples of horizontal and vertical performances. If we are talking about hierarchies, the horizontal structure means that we are dividing the responsibilities. It doesn't matter who speaks the first, because this person sets the discourse and the questions. The hierarchy as such is not bad. I think we need people who are more responsible, who have a broader scope of responsibility, who can bear the responsibility and have more authority, of course. I don't see it as something bad in itself. What is bad for me is abusing the term. Sometimes people call themselves horizontal theater, but it is not horizontal. I mean, and they have to understand the rules of the game. For example, we didn't select Marina as a moderator, and at the same time was happy to join the discussion. I think Marina is a beautiful moderator, and she formulated the topic in a beautiful manner. But what matters for me is clear understanding. To understand whether you are in a completely collaborative horizontal relationship, or you, for example, set the ground, you have the authority to make all the decisions, but you are playing the democracy by asking the question, do you agree with me? And do others really have the chance to say that they disagree? What will happen next? Will you revise your decision? So, for example, if I wrote to Marina Davidova, like, I don't like the topic, what will be the reaction? And the same with the performance, just understanding that I do have this authority, and how do I use it? Do I invite others to be co-authors? Or what I think about criticism, how do I deal with criticism? This is very important to understand. And the more we understand it, the better the environment will be. So it's about awareness and agreements, right? Understanding how we build relationship in the project. Yes, I think this is very important, especially in political projects. The theater I do is political, is social, and in this kind of theater, I think it is especially important, especially if you do that in Russia, where verticality is very vertical, is extremely vertical. The attempts to build alternative programs, alternative models of existence is really important. Thank you. I want now to pass the mic to Boris Pavlovich and remind the question that I said for our discussion, and I think it is very important, and it may be even painful. Is it possible to preserve, like, will bright personalities, will creative people survive in the arts? This is how I see the question, really.
равных друг с другом людей.
Or will it be just an endless collaboration of equal people? Well, let me even reformulate this question. This idea of horizontality, do you think it may be even more repressive and oppressive than the idea of verticality? I will go back to that because I may quote even an example of the horizontal structures which I dealt with in my life, and relationship with them was much more traumatic than the vertical structures I was part of. But I won't share my personal experience now. I will just pass the mic over to Boris Pavlovich, the author of the investigation of horror, who is part of our program and the show that I introduced in the introductory talk on the 1st of April. Hello. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for the wording. I also find it quite curious. And I will say straight away that any math that is going to deny a certain scale and will call us for switching to another scale is a priori absurd and impossible. So, I mean, this understanding of horizontality and verticality are the two axes we learned in schools. And if you want to find the coordinates of a dot, you need to have both the axes to find a dot in space. And in the sense, it is quite hard to say which one is better, which one is worse, as soon as one of the systems loses certain parameters, or when one of the parameters becomes dominating, the system breaks down. And I think that this conversation about the deficit of the horizontal trust, the deficit of delegating, it began just because of the fact that verticality was dominating in the Russian theater for many years, also because of the Russian society and the Russian politics. In this sense, I don't even try to think that this horizontal theater will emerge tomorrow and will destroy the hierarchy of the artist or the hierarchy of the value system. I think this discourse emerged to remind us that collaboration is what Stanislavski began with. Although Stanislavski was quite vertical, he wrote the text titled Ethics, where he delegated a lot of responsible presence and a lot of responsibility to all the actors. And unfortunately, this work, Ethics, has not been reprinted as much, though for Stanislavski himself, this book was the most fundamental, maybe even more fundamental than the method he introduced. And I think this is not an accident. Now we are generating new ethics just because we forgot to reread the old one. Although this is necessary, the ethical principles are fundamental. I will say just a couple words about my own experience. I don't see any other ways of existing in the arts besides authorship. When I say co-authorship, I mean a few authors. I don't believe that a collective can be an author, or I haven't had such an experience at all. But I have had the experience of a show where there were a few authors, every one of which were complete authors in their own rights. So dramaturg, for example, wrote the script, wrote the play, embodied his own intentions in this text. This is his statement. Me, as a director, I turn to the statement and I somehow respond to it and I add my own statement to it. After which I invite artists and I say, dear colleagues, this is the story we're going to work on.
Представлен здесь в Russian Case, это мое как бы очень личное высказывание, связанное с
What we have here
ощущением.
in the Russian case is my own personal statement. It has to do with me feeling homeless sort of, in St. Petersburg, and my apartment project was an attempt to formulate the lack of my own place on the map of St. Petersburg, and creating this like communal shared space, so like art in the kitchen. Would stem from me feeling this homelessness, and not just as a personal challenge, but it's something I felt a lot of artists shared. And I saw this echo with Vidyansky, with Barrier, with Harms, and the colleagues. Um, that's couldn't find a space for themselves to make a statement other than in somebody's home and somebody's like gathered around the table in the kitchen. And I came up with this concept like a party where you find a role model, and within this model, on behalf of harms, like a cosplay in a way. And from that moment, I gave them the right to be artists within a set system. So, um, top down, I set the system of coordinates. So, by building these parallels, I proposed a model of interaction. And then, what was key for me is not to be the builder, not to be the one who inhabits the system, who intrudes, invades. I handed it over to the individual and I let this person be the artist, like all of them. And this sequence of an artistic statement as a holistic thing is critical to me. As a performer, I was also sometimes involved in a whole number of projects. For instance, uh, I am in Andrei Maguchev's play, for instance, as a performer. And as someone who wants to make an individual statement, I'm somebody who's very like I'm very sensitive in terms of my self-esteem, my subjectivity. I can't just co-create with somebody else. I'm very lonely in this sense. But having received a certain task from Andre, I was given a niche that I could fill. I was free to fill myself. I was even the one who wrote the text for the first monologue for my character. And at that point, I was the lonely author. I took some books, I sat down with a cup of coffee, and I came up with my part. And at that point, I felt that I was alone in this. I was given this time slot and I was given the right to act as an author. And it was made possible by the fact that somebody else came up with a system, a sequence that was preset. And I had a similar experience with Misha Patlisov project, The Untouchables, a play with homeless people invited to perform alongside professional actors, and these homeless people that wanted to be on stage to share their experiences. And this was Mikhail Patlisov's name was there. He was the director. It was his name was on the posters. It was his project. He authored it. Alina Shklyanskaya, the playwright, was in charge of all of the other participants. It was a very hierarchy built project. I was given a task. I was given my territory again, and that's where I was the author. And had I not been given this task from Mikhail, I would probably never have got tuned in. This dialogue, I would have never met Andrei Zelenin, as somebody with a lot of experience living in the streets. And he became a really critical person in my life. So being part of this hierarchy system opened up a huge horizon of opportunities for me. Like this hierarchy model opened this horizontal horizon for me, and the model works. The question is, does this model, the hierarchy built by the author, does it open up these niches for authors to join in, like other personalities, other individuals to tune in? So there's this dialogue yeah, initiated. Like you've got this feudal system that assigns but does not delegate. So it's very relevant. These are completely two different systems. The distribution of the roles is only visibly shared uh, in Mish's Bachelor's Untouchables and say the Mona Theatre that we see a lot of examples of. Like when you have one key director in a little city, like in Yaroslavl, for instance. So we've got an actor who ran away from theatre, and for 10 years he would play in just with one director. He studied with this director. That's where he got his actor's education. And for a decade, he only worked with a single theatre director. And he's never had any alternatives in his life, no artistic alternatives at all. And he needs so much therapy, so much recovery, going back to his individual subject self. When he, as an actor, would be able to find his subjective territory of like creative statement, that he doesn't have to be a slave to the director. He does not have to serve the director. He can make his own individual statement. And this is something that's to be discussed further. On the one hand, I don't believe in co-creation. I only believe in individual creative statements. And I know it's not about belief anymore. I know how this works. When one person becoming an author launches this whole universe, this um, rapid movements enabling others to become authors, composers, producers, musicians, theater critics. So you set a mechanism in motion, and this triggers a lot of individual creative statements. So in this sense, in art, like the persona, the author, is never reduced to just and this collaborative nature
Корпоративный проект.
that Ada was
Например,
talking about. Well, I have a collaborative project, Stock, for instance. There were three of us working on it, me and my two mates, Alexander Mashanov, the actor, and Zhenya Anisimov, the actor. So the three of us came together, and this is a great way to collaborate. A max of three. We also had a lighting designer. We had two playwrights, Alexa Serzharchuk and Maxim Kurchkin. When you add more people to the mix, it turns this collaborative effort. So when people are equal in the process of decision making, would make it impossible, and even the producer wouldn't fit in. We are incredibly grateful to Tochka Dostup'a that gave us the opportunity. Marina, friends, well, we were talking for the international audience. They might not know the realities. What is Tochka Dostup'a? It's a St. Petersburg festival. It's a site-specific theatre festival, a point of access, Tochka Dostup'a, which is not so much a festival that shows ready-made works. It initiates, it funds, allocates a budget to create new content and new product. And this way we got a location, we got a site, we got the money to stage our play. Our model evolves around the fact that there weren't many of us and we can actually agree on things. So we can I think 5 people can agree on something. 14 people, that's not going to work. You would need some kind of a headquarters, somebody who would be in charge of the decision making. That's the way I see it. That's my experience. Marina, so far, it's a very positive dialogue that we're having. Um, the author is going to continue being at the center of this creative universe, and the actors are there with their creative statements, and collaborative theater is also possible. But nonetheless, something is telling me that this positivity is very explosive in a way, because we feel that this ethical assessments of the theatrical process of making a theatrical product. I hate the word, but I have to keep using it in certain contexts. It becomes perhaps even more important than the aesthetic criteria. Well, roughly speaking, you've triggered, give an impetus and impulse to others involved in your project. But imagine a situation whereby, like, somebody's very diligently working on a project, they've come a long way, and they've become a part of the team. And then you, with your director of vision, see that they're not doing a good job at reenacting your vision. And then you're faced with a dilemma. You could get rid of this person, which is a very painful process. You could replace them with another performer, or you continue to work with them. And this is where the bifurcation point is. What turns out to be more important? Boris, I can give you the answer. I've got an answer. Marina, so the end product, so the artistic product, is more important, or maintaining these comfortable, as they say now, a comfortable ambience within the team. Boris, I have an answer to this question. I have not once filmed a single. I have never replaced a single actor in my life because, to me, that's the anti-feudal principle that I'm guided by. I understand that if I called somebody to join my project and I said, okay, we're in it together. Starting from that, I have absolutely no moral right to tell the person, well, no, we're not together in this. So, in this respect, I am guided by very rigid principles, but it would be strange. Well, it's a very strange division between the process and the result. Journalists keep asking us, what was more important to you, the process or the result? I think that's an absurd way to split things. If a process is working, the result is the natural continuation, the natural um, finale of your process. It's more about the subjective nature. There is nothing peaceful, there's nothing positive about it. It's a horrific process, full of panic, full of hysteria, this creative search, which is incredibly painful, where once you reach out to your subjective individual creative statement, when you find your niche, when you find your territory, when each individual actor involved find their slot, it's not going to be an artistic defeat. That's the way I see it. Uh, in my performance, I have all of the professional actors. They're all engaged. It was absolutely everyone is engaged. We said that there's no casting at all. Whoever we had at that point, they all got engaged. And that was my job. I spent, I would, s- if somebody wasn't working, we needed to find a way, we needed to find a solution to help people fit into this project, an investigation of horror. And it was terribly difficult to do. I have this analogy. To me, the director is somebody who organizes a party. The person who throws the party, and I say, friends, let's get together for a Halloween party, or I don't know, we're going to uh, attack the Bastille today. This is a dress code. At the end, we're going to play, I don't know, charades, or and you can only have like grain-based alcohol. So I set the rules of the party. If I want the party to happen, if I want it to be a success, if I want it to work, people need to take on the roles. So they have to have fun. And if somebody doesn't like click, they don't fit in, they come in, they feel sick, well, that's my fault as well. And I have to take care of it. I have to like come up to them to have a friendly chat. Mm. If I start approaching everybody and I try to organize their fun for them, it's not going to work. Yeah, yeah, I saw you raise your hand, but I wanted Andrei Maguchev to say a few words. I think he's a very important participant of our talk today.
Родовая травма.
The natal trauma of theater stems from the fact that the nature of theater is to be a manipulative art. Theater is manipulative in nature because, one way or another, the artists, whatever they do, whatever they say, however they declare their intention, they manipulate the audience's emotions, they manipulate the audience's energy, and the director is the re- embodiment of this manipulation. Whatever they say, however they position themselves, they are still there to manipulate the performance, the actors, to through the actors to manipulate the audiences. And this is what the theatre process has been relying on for uh, centuries. That's a paradigm. There's no turning away from this. And the question, of course, is not as primitive as like, should the director be ethical towards the actors? Can they be rude? Can they hurt their feelings in any way? Well, perhaps we agree that no, they can't. They shouldn't, and we try to live within this. But it's still the manipulative nature of theatre is not something you can subtract. You can wash out. When you do that, perhaps even taking out the most essential element of the theatre itself. And I know a lot of cases. Looking back through the past, Kama Ginkis, for instance, the famous director who rehearsed Wood Number Six in Finland, and the interpreter Helena Melanie, who's working with him, and she told me sometimes she even gave me an interview about it. Uh, she, she said that with his main performer, he was very rough. He was very rigid, and at some point, this guy grabbed a knife and said to Kamaginkis, "If you approach me one more step, I'll kill you." And that's when Ginkis said to his interpreter, "Wow, great. He's right where I want him to be. He's in the state that I need him to be in to play this genius part." How do you treat this situation? And he was really a great performer. He did do a great job, a genius job. But the way the director got him into the state, well, it was, I guess, immoral, ethically non-admissible, and there are lots of examples like this with the theater. Is this something that we should ban as a way of relationships in the theatre? And there's lots of associated question. What to do with this manipulative nature of the theatre? I'm passing the floor to Andrei Maguchev, someone who
Манипулятивный театр.
embodies a manipulative theatre in a way.
Да,
Not manipulative, I don't know, but you are the demiurge. You create a world, you create a universe. In the visual dimension and all sorts of dimension. I need to either enter your universe or run away from it, but it's definitely dictated by your creative vision by
ой,
100%, I
Марин,
would
ну,
even say.
вообще, на самом деле,
Andre,
я сразу
well,
хочу сказать, что
Marina,
мне
I
удобнее в
have to
диалоге,
say,
да,
well,
чтобы меня
it's
лучше
much easier for me in
перебивать
a
и чуть
dialogue,
задавать
so
мне вопросы,
interrupt
чтобы я
me
куда-то
and
там
ask me
двигался, потому
questions.
что сейчас у меня очень
Otherwise,
много
well,
всяких разновекторных в голове направлений.
I'm
Я с Борей,
a
кстати,
bit
на самом деле
like
практически
scattered in
согласен
my
на
thoughts
все
right now.
100, да, на
I agree with what you said,
99%.
like
Боря все очень
99%.
правильно
Boris
сказал.
said the right things,
И
definitely.
добавить тут нечего, что
And
время
I
вообще не
don't have
тратить. По
much to
поводу
add, not to waste
манипулятивности,
any
ну,
more
правда,
time. In
да,
terms
тут
of the
как бы,
manipulative nature of art, of theatre,
да,
well,
Марин,
yes.
про что сказать-то? Тем
Marina, what
просто
do you want me
много,
to
ты
talk
меня
about?
направь. Про что
Lots
я
of
должен
topics.
говорить? Про
Direct me. Give
манипулятивность?
me
Про Гинкаса, который там унизил
Ginkis,
артиста.
who's
Про-
humiliating his actors. Marina, well, I'm almost convinced that in St. Petersburg, with these numerous groups built horizontally, there's an attempt to create an alternative, not just, well, to a different type of theatre, but to people living in the city. I think the participants of this horizontal theatre movement, uh, they are in
Ну, я
this
понял, понятно. Ну, так же, как и я в
dialogue
свое
in
время, да.
absentia with you, but you're probably in this
Ой,
ты на
Марина, ну
проценте
это вопрос,
dialogue
знаешь,
with
я,
them.
я, я же, ну, как бы ты знаешь, я на самом деле за сколько там,
Andrew, well,
когда я театром начал
Marin,
заниматься,
well,
это
how long
немного
have you
другого
been in
времени,
theatre? I
так,
can't
еще уже года
remember when it
прошли.
all started.
Я за это время прошел, мне кажется,
Over this
вообще все
time, I
формы и
think I've
виды
been through all forms and types and
вот,
modes of
иерархический, неиерархический,
hierarchy,
горизонтальный и так далее.
non-hierarchy,
Это все ведь, ну,
horizontal,
как и Борис
whatever.
справедливо сказал, хорошо
Boris was
забытое
absolutely right.
старое,
This
потому
is,
что, ну, я начинал с
you
моей
always
частной
recreate the
небольшой
past.
группы, формальный театр,
I
это был
started my formal
на самом деле
theatre
85 год,
in
хотя официально ко мне
1985.
как-то родились в
Officially,
90-м.
it was
Ну, и это была группа людей,
established in the
которые один
90s, and it
одному
was a
это
group of
вместе
people
сочиняли,
that
да, то есть как
were
бы и
just
я
co-creating,
вместе
working
с ними,
together,
мы вместе построили
collaborative, and we
театр,
were
мы вместе
all
там
working
красили стены
together
и
to
так
build
дальше,
a
да, то есть
theatre,
как бы
to paint the walls,
начиная
the
от
wall
быта,
in it
кончая
together,
художественными делами. Ну и
starting
дальше, и
from the
дальше, и
building
дальше, да,
itself and
столько проектов,
ending
которые
with
я
our
делал,
creative project.
разнообразных. Я думаю, что
I've
мало кто
always had
делал,
so
потому
many
что, ну,
diverse
действительно, мне
projects. There's so
интересно
much
было само
diversity.
путешествие
Uh,
в
it's
разные
the
формы
journey, it's
существования и
the
в разные
formats, it's the exploration of
взаимоотношения.
the various
Поэтому
forms of
мне это все
interaction that
понятно, что
captivated me.
сейчас
So I know
говорят, ну,
exactly what's been said now.
молодые. Да, то есть как бы, но и я таким же был, да, потом я
And
стал другим, и это
I
как бы
I
нормально. То есть мне
used to
кажется,
think
что
the
все
same
нормально.
way,
Я
and
опять
now
благодушен, что такого нет.
changed my mind.
Но
Perhaps
мне
I'm being
кажется,
too positive
что
again,
в
but
этом смысле сложность
in this case,
и
I think
манипулятивность,
the
и
the
шизофреничность
challenge with the manipulative and the
театрального
schizophrenic
искусства, где
nature
человек
of
является
theatre
творцом
art,
с
where
помощью
the
своего
man
собственного
is a
организма и психики.
creator using
Это
their own
вещь гораздо
psyche
более
and their own
сложная,
physical
тонкая, чем
state. So this is
и
something way
какая-либо
more
иная, которая может
um,
подпасть под какую-то декларацию или манифест. Это все
delicate,
очень,
that's
очень
something
и
that
очень
can be
сложно и
guided
очень
by
запутанно. И
declarations and
манипулятивность идет не только
regulations.
со стороны
Manipulativeness
режиссера,
is not just
ну а
coming from the
чаще и в большей
director.
степени со
More
стороны
often than
актера.
not,
Это
it's
вообще,
coming from the
конечно,
actors
такая в том,
themselves.
я сейчас скажу, в том типе театра, в котором
In
я
the
сейчас
type of the
участвую. Это не значит,
theatre
что я
that
в нем
I'm
завтра буду
currently
участвовать,
involved in. It
или
doesn't
не
mean that
значит,
I'm
что я
going to
просто
be
вчера или
stuck in it
вчера в таком участвовал.
forever.
Я
It doesn't
участвую в
mean that
разных
this is the
типах
kind of
театра.
theatre I've always
Но
been
тот тип
involved in.
театра,
I've been
который
through all
сейчас,
types of
в котором
theatres.
я
But the type of theatre I'm
судьба меня
currently
окунула, да, то есть
engaged
как бы
in,
он,
um,
конечно, иерархичный, и он,
it's
конечно же, вот
definitely a
такой
hierarchy one
манипулятивный, да,
in
то есть как бы
nature, and it's
с
manipulative in
целью которой
nature.
является действительно такой, как Гротовский
And
формулировал, театр как
Grotowski
средство
said that the theatre
представления и театр как
is a
средство
way
передвижения. У него
of
два типа театра. Вот мы, конечно,
um,
мы передвигаем в неком лифте, конечно,
presentation and a
публику,
way
которая
of
приходит и
movement.
ахает там от того или от
And of
всего, ну, как
course,
бы
we're
мы,
trying to
естественно,
move the
манипулируем
audience, but
публикой.
of course, we
Я сейчас не
manipulate
вижу
the
других типов
audience.
театра
I
вокруг
don't see
себя,
any other
хотя мне,
types of
конечно, было бы
theatres
интересно
around me, but
и
although
другие
it would
проявления,
be
которые в мои
interesting for me
молодые
to
годы
see
гораздо
other
были более
types of
театр
theatre that
разнообразные,
were more
где
diverse
были
when I was
театры, которые
younger,
вообще исключали
theatres that
вопрос манипуляции
excluded
как таковой. И я таким
manipulation as
театром занимался
such.
7 лет.
And
На
I
Ржевке,
was
когда мы не
involved in something
показывали
like this for
свои
7 years
опусы
when we
зрителям
never
принципиально.
showed
То есть
our
мы там были
performances to the audience
абсолютно
ever.
замкнуты и
We were
варились, собственно,
absolutely
в шафу.
isolated.
Это было 7
And
лет.
that
Я
lasted
даже
for
сам не верю
seven
своим
years of
ушам,
my
насколько
life.
это
I can't
было. То
even
есть там
believe
даже
that now.
не было речи ни о какой манипулятивности
There was no
или по
manipulation
отношению
at
к
all
зрителям,
towards the
справедливо ты
audience
говоришь,
because
ну,
there
как,
was no
собственно говоря, и
audience.
не было
There
манипулятивности
was no
по отношению
manipulation
к друг другу,
towards
потому что там было
each
такое,
other
больше такое,
because it was more
конечно,
about
послуг такой, медитация, да, то есть как бы в этом смысле
meditation,
театральная, ближе к Гротовскому
like theatre
дела, да.
meditation, closer to
Но я сейчас
Grotowski.
говорю, там типов театра очень много, и
There's
это вообще
very
был
many
очень
different types of
отдельный такой
theatres out there.
крутой, может быть, разговор по
And
поводу
we could
того, что
have a
такое
very
вообще театр. Мы с
captivating
тобой
talk
даже
about
уже
this,
начинали
about
про это
what
говорить
theatre
как-то во
is. We
времена
even
пандемии.
started this
Вот если
dialogue.
убирать из театра одно за другим,
If you
что в нем
take
останется?
out various
Что, собственно,
elements
театр
from the
такое?
theatre,
Это
what is
еще одна
theatre
тема.
about?
Поэтому я
What
немножко
can it
тут в этом
survive
смысле,
without?
путаюсь, потому что, конечно же,
So
в этом смысле вот в этом смысле это очень широкая тема. Она очень
it's a
широкая,
very
и мне бы
wide
интересно было, конечно,
topic.
ее сузить до таких
It would be
профессиональных, да,
interesting to
историй,
narrow it
а не
down to
социальных.
some professional aspects, not social aspects.
Потому что, мне кажется, здесь сейчас очень много
I
незнаний,
think
пробелов,
there is a lot of gaps in our
такой неразвитости,
experience,
да, то есть, которые я вижу сейчас
knowledge that I'm
вокруг
seeing
себя.
around
И от этого
myself,
скучновато,
and
конечно, да,
it
не с
makes
ним
things
столкнуться.
boring.
А не слышно тебя.
I can't hear you, Marina.
Да-да.
Marina, can you hear me now? Yes. Well, let me try to ask the question again. Looking at my own experience, so all of the most interesting, most captivating impressions that I've been getting from the theatre have to do, for the most part, 95% of them have to do with the vertical theatre, the so called vertical theatre, a theatre with this puppets I'm not sure this puppet maker, uh, the character from Pinocchio who pulls the strings and manipulates this tyrant who manipulate his puppets. Meyerhold was often called
Это правда.
the puppeteer. That's true. Well, the oldest and strongest impressions I got from the theater are, in one way or another, tied to the theater where this repressive figure is present. It's the theater that's currently emerging. There are some examples that are incredibly interesting, like Shishapur, the group that came for the Net Festival with the Fathers, a very interesting performance. But for the most part, what I see in the horizontal theatre is artistically inferior. It's not very convincing, independently from what we might want. Uh, Ethics becomes more uh, um,
Я,
ethics
знаете,
beats
один раз я
aesthetics. There's less impression. There is
начинал
less convincing artistic statements. Others, it would be interesting to hear what she has to say. To what extent, like you've been immersed in theaters, but looking at the programs for like large European festivals, for instance. And back in 2010, 2011, and 2012, the programs of the European festivals, I'm not even talking about Russia now, it was a program of these repressive names, essentially. Now, focus is shifting. Focus is shifting elsewhere, but they're becoming less interesting for me as a theatre critic. What's key for me, the theatre text that I'm seeing on the stage, to what extent I will enjoy decrypting it, interacting with it. Does it provoke me intellectually, and etc. And I have to say that there are fewer of these impressions out there. What do you think? What would you say, looking at your own experience? Ada, I do want to say a lot of things. Yeah, I want to stop being positive. Answering your very first question about like big names. Over the course of our conversation. Gobsquat, Shishiko Protocol, Forest Entertainment, Gold Island, not very well known in Russia, but well known in the English speaking world. Woods Shant, a lot of names that never got to Russia. When I was studying in London, and you said that it's this small island. In actual fact, I felt that our continental part, this is a completely different universe, because the names that I knew that were a reference to me, big names in my life in the English speaking space, which is bigger than the UK. It includes Australia and the US and all of the other English speaking countries. They have a completely different set of references. When you were talking about an alternative aesthetics and alternative ethics, well, not to discuss those present, if I'm looking at Lev Dodin's performances, that doesn't happen very often, but sometimes it does. Greatly created, very skilledly put together. You can't find the threads. It's all sewed together perfectly, and it's a very intricate world. And I get bored. I get bored in theatre like this. I get so bored. I guess what we're talking about is what kind of aesthetics are we looking for. I get bored because there's no space for me. If I was just to leave, nothing would change. This play will exist without my involvement or participation. Oops. Ada, I think you got disconnected. I have no chance to add my meaning to it. In this sense, collaborative work, collaborative art, co-creation. That's not what Boris was talking about, because, well, Boris said that he's got a whole sequence who comes after. It's when I talk about a collaborative effort, I mean something that's bringing together people that will collaborate to add elements. Somebody would add music, somebody would add text, and they work together to create the end product.
Которой в том числе есть какие-то прорехи иногда, и есть
And it
несовершенства.
gives birth to completely different aesthetics, which may be imperfect, which may have gaps at times, and the audience can intervene into these gaps. So this is not a perfectly woven fabric, pretty much like our world. And here is why I feel the need for this. Sometimes I do create projects myself if I have an idea, but I do have a need to create some projects in collaboration. Especially it concerns the projects that deal with unexpected topics or set up a new territory. I'm very interested in what GOP Squad and Rimini Protocol do and Forced Entertainment. But I believe that very often, and
маскируют
this
собой
collaborative horizontal work is a mask for the lack of the creative will. So for me personally, Rimini Protocol is Stefan Kegi. By the way, Marina, I told Stefan about your article that he was a flagman of Rimini Protocol. He was very much surprised and he said he needed to position himself somehow differently in Russia because he travels more to Russia. Edgar works more in Germany and Daniel works more in Greece. I also saw Rimini Protocol projects where Stefan
в которых он
did not work as much as in others. I just like them less than the ones that he authored. So I still believe that even if people
очень часто
agree to position themselves as a horizontal theater, still there is a kind of a creative personality which defines the whole aesthetic. So this is how I see it. This is how I read it. If the script does not have such a bright and outstanding figure, then normally the product,
меня несколько менее
the
интересно.
performance, for me is not that interesting. But
Объективного
now I'm
взгляда
talking just from my very subjective experience. Other people may think differently, completely differently. And you were quoting Lev Dodin, and I think this is not quite correct. He's an outstanding director. There are much more relevant figures, Romeo Castellucci, Mila Rao, for example, who still work in that former paradigm of a single author theater. And Castellucci's performances really shocked me. They were amazing. As well as other shows by some of the authors who are at the same time dramaturgs, directors, set designers, and performers even in their shows. I don't know if you agree with me, but the more talented the person, the more oppressive they are. It is quite hard for
я бы сказала, противоестественное, потому что
for talented people to suppress their charisma. It would be counternatural, I think, if such a bright, interesting personality enters into a collaboration with others. It has to put out its own fire in a way. Otherwise, there will be no ethical collaboration as such. Or would you disagree? So ethical horizontality. What should big talents do? Everybody wants to answer, I think. Oh, please go. We don't have that much time left, actually.
Переходить к вопросам аудитории.
Можно
And
я?
we're going to switch soon to the questions from the audience. Sorry, may I intervene for three minutes? I think there is inertia of tradition, what Boris was talking about. There is a circle of co-authors. Set designer, composers, directors. We take into account the wheel, and there are like 20 more actors who just perform, who just follow our lead. And then I check these conventions in many situations, and sometimes artists, actors do not want this horizontality. They are happy to perform, they are happy to follow the lead. They think it's their life. But I'm now in Arkhangelsk. We made 2 shows already with this theater company, and when I asked them, "What do you think, guys?" They're just silent. I'm like, maybe you want to contradict or you want to say something. So I have a feeling that behind me, I have, I don't know, soldiers who are going to kill them and their families. So they have always lived in this hierarchy. It is unjust in a way, but I think it can be very easily solved through negotiations, through agreements, which have to be updated once in a while. Otherwise, we just follow one and the same path, which tanks have scouted, and we have certain limitations, we have certain possibilities. Both parties, if both parties are happy to renegotiate, this is always cool. Yes, thank you, Ilya. Maybe we need to explain in a couple of words to our listeners. That is true that Russia is huge. And especially now, very archaic types of theater coexist with the most progressive theater. I think there are kinds of theater which cannot be found anywhere in Germany, for example, and maybe your actors were silent because they are just not used to being subjects in conversations. So they have always existed in this really repressive, oppressive theater. Yes, but now all these chats, Telegram channels, all of this media of communication, I think they opened up these underground worlds. Like what Ada now spoke about Lev Dodin and Bagatelle. These guys have a chat and they openly share the most intimate thoughts. So we understand that on the one hand, it's true that they made an amazing show, but it's like I don't have any access. I don't have any access to the methods and to what is being done in Lev Dodin's performances. And he loves to rehearse for 5-6 years. And throughout these 5-6 years, a lot of things happen. And then we have to decide whether we are ready to watch what is being done with this method. Like it impresses me theatrically, the production impresses me, but when I know how it is done, am I ready still to perceive this performance? Will it spoil my impression, or maybe it is better for me not to know about it? Oh, for me, it's not
Нет, ну лучше знать.
a question. It's always better to know. I think it's evident. Then I think that your theatrical impression will be spoiled. Okay, I'm ready for that.
Борис,
Ну,
Andrei,
Борь, ты хотел,
Boris.
я могу сказать, или Борь, ты руку тянул давно. Марин, ну вопрос, мне кажется, немножко все-таки он сводит опять к некой формуле. Вот все тираны. Вообще не так всё
Again,
просто.
I think
Потому что,
the question again brings us back to a
да, потому что,
formula,
ну,
to a
конечно,
set
помимо
formula.
артистов я должен вспомнить
I
еще, что
mean,
режиссер
besides
сотрудничает там с
actors,
художником.
we have to
Я могу себе
remember that
привести пример там
directors
Саши Шишкина, с которым я 20 лет уже там
collaborate
работаю.
with set
И
designers
это
like
абсолютно наша
Shishkin,
совместная
who I've
работа.
been working with for
Абсолютно
20 years. And this is completely
коллаборативная,
collaborative,
да? И вообще внутри
if
нашей
I'm using
вот
the right
маленькой
word.
творческой, постановочной, иногда там есть артисты, иногда их нет.
And in
Всегда это
our
какая-то,
staging,
Боря прав, там
we
3-4
Boris
человека,
is
которые как бы
right. There
сочиняют
are 3,
историю
4
будущую,
people who
который
invent
потом
the
как бы,
story,
ну,
not
там
just
кто-то
one.
прилипает, да,
And
то есть
then
редкий пар.
others
Да,
join it
поэтому
later on.
вопрос. А дальше есть такой момент, когда мы просто расходимся по цехам. Я не могу вместо Шишкина делать 3D-модели, он как бы
But
отлично
I
работает с
can't
мастерскими,
make
иногда
a
там
3D model, for
тут
example, instead of
тоже не
Shishkin. He's better
бесконфликтно. Я
than
работаю
me
с
in
артистами.
that.
С артистами, кстати, я
I
работаю
work
всегда
with
бесконфликтно, у меня не было
actors. He
никаких в этом
works
смысле
in a
методов
workshop.
тиранических, да, так
By the
сказать.
way, I am not
Я ни в
a
коем Боря, может, меня
tyrant.
поправит, может, я в
Maybe
запале что-то не
Boris
помню,
will
но, в принципе, артист для
correct
меня
me now.
абсолютно
Maybe I do
соавтор,
not
абсолютно автор
remember
своей роли. Я
anything,
это
but I
всегда
think that
люблю
all
и
actors are
часто это
co-authors of their
подчеркиваю, да,
own rules.
поэтому,
I
ну,
love
где-то,
that, and
конечно,
I
надо
very
применять
often
методы, которые могут вскрыть то,
express
что,
it. Of
собственно
course,
говоря,
sometimes you
там
have to use the
артист
methods
может не
that
вскрыть
will open
самостоятельно.
up in the
По мне, так
artists and the actors something that they
ситуация
cannot
очень
open up
простая.
in
Вот я сейчас, мне не
themselves
нравится, например,
on
модератор,
their
может быть,
own.
я не имею в виду. Я нажимаю кнопку «Выйти» и ушел. Все. И какие проблемы, друзья мои? Вы не хотите знать — знаете, не хотите знать — не знаете, не
And as
хотите
for
ходить —
you,
не ходите,
knowing or
хотите
not
ходить — ходите,
knowing, it's
хотите
your will.
спорить —
You
спорьте,
want
не
to
хотите
go
спорить —
to
не
the
спорьте.
show,
Все очень
go.
просто, на
You want
самом
to
деле.
argue,
И
do that.
в этом
You don't want
смысле
to,
у
don't.
Додина такой метод. Ну,
This is
такой метод.
very
Если
easy.
кому-то...
Like
Ну,
Lev
Желтых, вы
Dodin
знаете, как
has
Желтых
this
репетировал?
method. That's
Я один
right.
раз посмотрел. Я никогда не пойду к нему вообще в артисты. Никогда.
I will
Никогда.
never
Но очень многим
be
нравится.
his
И
actor. I
он
will
выдает,
never be his
ну, с
performer.
моей точки
But many
зрения,
people
очень
love this
часто, не
method.
может не
And I
всегда,
think very often, maybe
высококлассный
not
художественный
always, but
результат.
very
И для
often
меня,
he
конечно, эта дилемма между
delivers a great
художественным результатом и
result.
этикой, она, в общем,
So this
держится вот в
dilemma
споре
between the
известном, наверное,
creative result
всем
and
нам между
ethics, for
Тарковским и
me,
Оселяни, если
hinges
вы помните такую
on
историю, да, то есть
the
как бы
argument between
для
Mastroianni and
Тарковского, который там сжигал
Tarkovsky.
корову
For
там или что-то
Tarkovsky,
еще,
who
да, в
burnt a
кадре,
cow, for
и
example,
мотивируя это тем, что ну,
on
все
the
равно же она
set,
пойдет на скотобойню, да, то есть как бы. В
saying
его
that she
заочном
will be
споре с
slaughtered
Оселяни,
anyway.
который ответил ему заочно, что
And Iosiliani answered
срубить
him,
дерево только когда тебе холодно, и убить животное, когда ты голоден, да, то есть
you
можно
can kill an
говорить,
animal only when
этика,
you're
этика или
hungry,
жизнь была
and you can
превыше.
cut a tree only
Для
when you're
Тарковского
cold.
искусство было
So for
превыше
him,
жизни. Мы
ethics
все
was more
барахтаемся в этой жилке.
important.
Так или иначе, другой нет. Да, то есть
And
как
for
бы каждый из нас
Tarkovsky,
выбирает
art was more
по себе.
important
То,
than
что вы
life.
говорите
So we
про
are all like
тиранические театры и архаику
oscillating
русского
in this
репертуарного
talk.
театра, это
When
отдельная
you're
вообще
talking
тема. Она
about the
не
archaics of
она
the
к
Russian
художественному
repertoire
воспитанию
theater,
вообще
this
не
is
имеет
like a
никакого отношения.
completely different
Устройство,
topic.
идиотское устройство
This
репертуарного театра — это отдельная
idiotic
тема. Она
structure of
связана с
repertoire theater is
организацией,
a
с товарищем
completely different
Сталиным, который
thing.
все это там в
It's
каком-то году
connected
сделал.
to
Это надо
Commander
реформировать, безусловно, но
Stalin, to
реформировать
all
художника,
these
мне кажется,
things. It has to be
невозможно. Он
reformed.
будет всегда
But I don't
вынужден
think that
находиться, выбирать себе
artists and
коллаборацию, не
directors
коллаборацию,
can
чего
reform
угодно.
that.
И
They will
кто-то
come and they will
хочет с ним
choose
работать,
whatever they are more
кто-то не
comfortable
хочет с ним
with.
работать. Жизнь сама это регулирует.
Collaboration or
Безумных
lack
всяких
of
рассуждений по этому
collaboration,
поводу. Я в
and
этом
it will be
уверен и
regulated
убежден.
by life
Поэтому
itself.
каждый выбирает свой путь. Тут
So
толкаться-то, как говорил
everybody
известный персонаж.
will build their own journey. There is a freedom of choice. I
Конечно,
mean,
я,
if
Марин,
you agree
всегда,
to take part,
да,
then later on you don't have the right uh, to accuse the authors. For example, I know the cases when the team of the theater were gathered to talk to a director, and then after the first talk, half of them said, "We are not going to work with him anymore," and others followed him blindly. And I don't know why, because I would be unable to exist in such repressive conditions. But I saw that
весьма
they acquired
специфическое
some
при
kind
этом
of
удовольствие. Конечно.
satisfaction. Yeah, quite
Да-да-да.
cruel, quite manipulative conditions gave them certain satisfaction. They loved it, loved it. And I think it's impossible to make a template like to discuss how ethical all actions are. It's all about negotiations before anything begins. Like if Lev Dodin's actors have the right not to rehearse the Brothers Karamazov with him for 4 years. So they rehearse for 3 years and then they will be removed from this role and the role will be played by somebody else. And this happens in Dodin's theater quite a lot. I understand that it's painful and it's traumatic, but if they agreed
Конечно, Марин,
to
это известная
if they
телега,
agreed
да,
to
то есть как бы
work, like I don't
терроризм
know,
всегда
why don't they
базируется
just say
на
no?
жертве, на потребности
That's
жертвы
true. I
террора в
mean,
этом терроризме.
terror
Обязательно две стороны
hinges
всегда есть. И
on the
тут как
need
бы, ну,
of the victim.
грубо
There are
говоря,
two sides to the matter all the time. The next question is, do they
свобода
have the
выбора
freedom
есть у
of
человека
choice?
всегда.
People
Вообще
have the
всегда.
freedom of choice all the time. I also hope for that. But I don't think everybody will agree with me. Me? Me?
Так, там, сексуальными играми и семейным
I
насилием.
think that there is a parallel here with, there is a difference between a BDSM club and domestic abuse, family abuse. So manipulations can be different. One has a consent, one is negotiated.
Может быть,
One,
неожиданно,
like when you go to a chiropractor, who will of course pain to you, and I don't know, it feels like they tear you apart. This is also manipulation. What chiropractors, osteopaths do is manipulation, but you pay for that. You signed a contract because you need a result, and this chiropractor has the necessary means. And completely different relationship is when a man abuses his wife, and she always has the freedom to leave. And we understand that the difference is colossal, the difference is huge between me attending a chiropractor and parents who beat children or husbands who beat their wives. It's like it would feel that they always can leave, but
А
it's a
почему
much more
нельзя, Борь? Почему?
complicated
Ну, ты сравниваешь, ну,
process. They
взрослые люди
can't
все.
always leave.
Почему
But
ты
like
сравниваешь,
they are
что
all
нельзя? Ну, почему
adults.
артист Додина не может
I
уйти
mean, why
в
Dodin's
другой театр,
actor
в
cannot
кино?
leave
Я не могу это понять.
to the different theater? Maybe because he lives in an apartment which is provided by the theater
Друзья
and
мои,
his
ну, друзья мои,
salary is
мы
very
опять
small.
переходим к ситуации, связанной с русским репертуарным
But
театром.
like,
Да, то есть как бы,
guys,
ну, не
again, we're
получается
switching
квартира.
to
Если ты, ну, это
the
твой выбор.
discussion
Если ты
about the
хочешь
Russian
жить в этой квартире и
repertoire
хочешь за нее
theater.
платить
I mean,
такую
if you
цену,
want to live
я
in this
таких тоже примеров
apartment
знаю
and you
достаточно.
want to
Не
pay what
получается.
you pay for it. Sorry, may I continue what I was saying? I just wanted to divide these two things. And there is huge research about domestic abuse
тема, требующая большой
because this is a really difficult topic which requires systemic work, which requires psychological support and systematic education at schools, in social, in the society, because of the learned, for example, helplessness. Since it's Russian case today, Russia has a certain case which I wanted to share. We also need to educate people that they do have the free will, they do have their choice. It has to be educated, it has to be brought up. And in my work, when I work as a director, I also like to do this micro reform of the state. Every time when I come to the theater to make a production, I am an assigned leader. I was assigned with the command. And then throughout this dynamic of the process, I understand that with the collective, with the team, we can rebuild these relationships and we can gain our subjectivity. We all know the word privilege. I'm a privileged person. I'm from St. Petersburg. I have good education. I am mentally healthy. I do see, I do hear. I'm not disabled in any manner. And I know that this gives me a chance to help those who have not had a similar experience of happiness, have not been so lucky to approach this experience. And in this sense, I think um, d- um, theater professionals are really demiurge. And Ksenia Peretrukina says that very often theater is rehearsal of freedom. This is why I love working in huge repertoire theaters. For example, yesterday I released a show in Yaroslavl was 700 audience members, 15 actors for a month and a half.
Формировали
What we did was not just staging a show, was not just making a show, but we also formed dialogue. We negotiated our relationship. We even in their theater institute,
и мы учимся.
They started to believe, or they were made to believe, that their opinion didn't matter. We relearned these patterns. We found the situations where their opinion did matter. And in this sense, I believe that my own role, with the credit of trust I get, with the credit of authority, with the credit of power, I have a lot of social opportunities. And I think a production is a small state. It's a shared kind of respublica, yeah, as they say in Latin, this common shared activity. And in the Russian repertoire theater, I see that it resembles a city, a state. And this is why I don't see any chance for building a completely horizontal collective. What about the Novgorod democracy, the Novgorod medieval history? Well, I'm talking about the situation today. Now it's vertical. And my job is in learning the situation and seeing whether the alternatives are. I mean, we get the situation as it is, and the question is, what are the alternatives?
Жутковато. После каждой моей постановки кто-нибудь да уезжает из театра. Это
After
ничего
every project of mine, somebody leaves the theater. It's just somebody gets an experience. Like, why don't I just leave? It's not a good thing or a bad thing, but this experience of being in a dialogue is important. That's point number one. Point number two was talking about the quality, about aiming to be perfect. Having lived in Kirov, where I was the chief director of a small provincial theater, the artistic director, and there was nothing else in. There was no context in the city, no creative alternative to our theater, and our theater was working on organizing like book exchanges, poetic readings, in urban settings, discussions related to the performances, not related to the performances. There was a lot of action around it, and there was a lot of density of what was happening. And I came to the Dance Open Festival, and there was a ballet by Ahram Khan. I remember that, and I knew it was amazing. And I was just sat there, and I was astounded. I was like, "This is not something you experience in Vyatka." I went. That was the big dramatic theatre. I'm walking from the theatre to the Nevsky Avenue in St. Petersburg, and I get to the Cloud's Horses, and I realize that I've lost the feeling. I was astounded. It was amazing. The performance was amazing, but this short walk, St. Petersburg winds washed it all off. This whole amazing artistic experience, whereby these small things, when you've got four Kirov school children that so we sat there in the classroom discussing the performance after, and they said, like, "Wow, Boris, that's what you meant by it." And I came out and I'm thinking about these four school kids for a week, and they're still in my mind. And that was more astounding. If you look at the scale, like this aesthetic value scale, if you will, um, it would be within the margin of error, but internally, within the reality of a specific social context or process, these non extraordinary artistic movements are much more significant in terms of acquiring human experience. art is always about human experience. It's about getting to this catharsis. My chemical composition changes. This is what we expect from art. We want to be astounded. We want to go through strong emotions. Either you have that or you just don't need it at all. But what is the mechanism for getting these impressions? Sometimes is what Marina was talking about. This could be a complex organization of scenic text, or it could be an experience from a discussion or from interacting with the audience. The reason why performances are so often a failure in Moscow because this level of dialogue is already there, and some elements that for Astrakhan or another regional town they would be an existential emotion. They're not the same for those in Moscow. I think that the criteria is there, the level of impression and how you change, how you are transformed as a result, and the different design principles. Well, there's different ways to get there, and an artistic impression helps me build my semiotic structure. I realize that the world is made of complex symbols, and we're all looking for this semiotic experience to realize that things are not what they seem to be. They're not what they are perceived as. So when you are astounded by the complexity, and then you need a mono author because a complex text needs to be authored. It's probably going to come that way. But at the same time, you need impressions from something depending on you, your input, your contribution. This is what Anda was talking about. And this and Erika Fischer Richter, with his presence as a concept in his book, the Aesthetic of Performative Art, he enables us to bring these closer, these two poles, bring them into the same scale, the same dimension of a theatrical happening. Sometimes it has to be something like iconic, or sometimes it's the topic that triggers you and becomes the cornerstone of your experience. Marina, yes, of course, all of these impressions can be very different, and even a catharsis can be experienced differently. Sometimes you can experience something very strong in a church, strong emotion, but they will be just of a different nature, not the same that I would feel as I would get from Christian Lupa. And there's a lot of psychotherapeutic practices that can lead to absolutely amazing results. Um, Maybe way more lengthy than a Kamhansa, but they're completely different in nature. And when we talk about art, with all of its diversity, we are trying to find why we need art at all. Like, what is it for? What does it exist for? Because there's lots of social activities of a different nature. Boris, well, Marina, even here, I would trip and I would say, like, this very simple thing. When you work in the provinces, there is no difference. Theater essentially is the only place where you bring people together. Marina, but this brings us back to Russia's specifics. Boris, well, this situation, I think it's formative. I think it sets the structure, and I don't think it's unique to Russia. Boal, with his in Latin America, he revolutionized it at every level, both aesthetic and ethical, because theater was the only place that can chemically change your being. I don't think it's specific to Russia. In fact, this is something that's imminent to theater, theater that brings together a lot of people, and they don't have a system of coordinates from the to begin with. That's the difference with the church. When you get to church, you know the rules of the game. When you get to the theater, you are dealing with an empty space. As an audience, as an actor, we met in an empty space, and then we get an experience over the course of the 3 hours of the performance together. We are creating an atmosphere, uh, a semantic field that's only possible if the audience is willing to accept these rules of the game, figure them out, start to play by the rules of the game, And this experience is completely different from what you would have in a church or at a sports event. Because if you don't know the rules of a sports game, well, you don't get anything. You don't understand what's going on. In the theater, the rules of the game starts to be built. If you talk about contemporary theater, not kabuki, for instance, not no. In contemporary theatre, rules of the game are formed the moment the performance starts. And that's a critical experience. As a creator, we negotiate the rules of the game with the audience. And this open code as Linux, as a system, that's what theatre is about. And that's bringing us back to this horizontal relationship between the actors and the audience. We manipulate, just as an operating system, you press you click something, you press a button, and it does something. We open up this operating system, and within this OS, we enable the audience or whoever to play around, to participate in the functioning of the system. Marina, let me interrupt you at this, Boris. You're absolutely right. When I was making a lecture on contemporary theatre, I was talking about this being a game. Contemporary theatre is a game, the rules of which are mastered by the audience during the game itself. Transforming um, aesthetic impressions into meanings comes with grasping these rules. This is something that fits into what we were talking about today, but it's sort of a part as well. There's nothing to argue here about. Like, in a vertical theater, it works as well. When you have a dictator, the audience can get there and try to figure out how the performance work, even if it's authored by a single creator. And if it's not, same applies. You can be a part of this aesthetic dimension created by a team of people. The topic of our talk today is slightly different. To me, the key question that I can't answer, but that I'm really interested in exploring, is whether we need to keep this charismatic creator within this new theatrical paradigm that's emerged, that's definitely here to stay, that I'm really captivated by. But within this new paradigm, I'm struggling to. Boris, Marina, well, stop a second. You're talking about this paradigm, but give us examples. You were talking about St. Petersburg, but give us three teams like that in St. Petersburg. Marina, well, Вокруг да около, out and around. The last two projects, talking about leftist tendencies in theatre, the Ice Cream Cafe, um, out and about. These are feminist teams more often than not. Ada was talking about their project at the Mayor Halder Center, collaborating. Boris, but these are names again. Ada Mukhina is a name, and Olga Tarakanova is a name. I don't think there's any contradiction in terms here. Marina, well, there is a contradiction because, well, you, as somebody who lives in St. Petersburg and who knows St. Petersburg much better than I do because you're more often there, you could give me the names of the team. You probably wouldn't, but they are a striking team. They have been nominated by the Golden Mask this year. Can you give me the names of the participants? Probably not. You don't know their names. I'm talking about Gold Mask participants. Previously, it was not an easy thing to accomplish, and these names would probably be known. Like Smashinsky, I know him. I know his name. Here, we don't know the name. We just know the name of the team, and they don't want their names to be heard and remembered. It's a team that functions differently. It's important for them to insist on their horizontal nature. It has a therapeutic value to them. Let me give you another example. When I was talking about a repressive horizontal hierarchy, I'm not a part to a group like this, but I'm an editor, and we were putting together our last edition, and I received something that was written by, I think, 7 authors. Each bit was written by a single author, but I received it as a single piece. I got that. I started to read it, and I realized that within these 7 chapters written by different people, there's one chapter that is several times longer than the others. That's absolutely brilliant. It's a brilliant piece of writing, and it's critically important for our uh, edition. And I asked these authors to extract this single chapter and to place it as a separate article. I said it would work great as part of the overall concept and your ideas. i- This text, it was absolutely brilliant in terms of talking over these new leftist trends, very accurate definitions of neoliberalism. Uh, I set out, it's a very well written piece of text, and they told me, no, absolutely not. You cannot extract this text. You cannot publish it as a separate article. What's important for us is that we're horizontal. We are all together. You can't even change the sequence of the text within this piece. But I said, well, come on, you can lose this big text if you publish a lot. We don't mind that. You can't even change them around. Boris, there's no contradiction here as far as I see. If you said you wanted to change the sequence in my uh, project, I would say no. There's always a structure. It doesn't matter how many authors you have. Marina, there is no value in the structure itself. That's your opinion, Marina. Marina, I was asking him why they had the sequence. They said, well, as we received the text. Boris, that's part of the concept. Marina, it's part of the concept. Marina, if they send it in first, Boris, there's no contradiction here. There is there's nothing new here. Like residents as a group. I don't know the names. Well, you know, they've got these like eyeball in the electronic group. Who's behind the residents? Nobody knows. We don't have the names. It's a music group that's positioning themselves without any names of the performance. Or, for instance, well, I know Kraftwerk. I've been listening to them all my life. Ask me. Uh, the names of the crafts. I have no idea. I'm like, well, I must have known about them. Well, Kraftwerk, that's it. I know. Well, we've got David Bowie, and it's a different way of positioning yourself. Kraftwerk are the four guys, and it's essential. There's four of them behind their notebooks, and they've never been the front men. Not a single one of them ever stepped forward. But David Bowie, Marina, well, you're right. But the trick here is I've never talked to the author of the text. I only talked to the intermediary who sent in the text. Boris, it's like the residents, right? Marina, so they were the ones that were conveying the ideas. The author perhaps would have been glad if the text got published separately. I just don't know. Boris, Marina, I don't. I think you're looking for an ethical revolution, and it's just not there. There are groups. I think it's a very transparent analogy with music. Either, well, you've got the Beatles. So, yeah, you've got the Beatles so that exist as four personalities so that were well known. Or you could have a group that's never existed in their individual performance, like Kraftwerk. Or you have Boris Grebenshikov, who was always like on his own. Like it's just different ways people find a comfortable way of positioning themselves, of coexisting. I don't think there is any revolution here that you're looking for, that you're trying to identify as a threat. And I think there is various the groups that got together in the 80s and the 70s. More often than not, they would be trying to make an anti-capitalist statement. They were trying to bring together people that were discarded by the system. A lot of female bands came around, marginalized ones. Very well, they're doing the right thing. And yes, to make their voices heard because they can't be heard on their own, single voices. It's a revolutionary attempt. And it doesn't matter what the group decides to position them as. They need recognition. They need recognition for their group efforts. So very often we say that this genius director charismatic director. Very often there is more people behind them, women, non-women, like directors, assistants that have been working with them all their lives as co-authors in a way. And the names are often, we know Auguste Boal, we don't know anybody else, right? Marina, right. And well, I would say that. Who else would you want to know? He's got his wife, Cecilia, that the community talks a lot about. Of course, well, I'm somebody who's not engaged into the farm theatre, but I know Boal, but I can't give you five more names. I can't because Augusto Boal is a brand, but his practice is to the benefit of thousands of people across the globe. And there's nothing bad in the fact that this brand enabled to raise awareness with this ideology. And well, in Berlin, there is a feminist group by Barbara Santos from Brazil. She worked with Augustus Boal quite a lot on legislative theatre in Rio de Janeiro, and she's just released a number of books on the fact that in the theatre of the repressed, a lot of female names get forgotten. This is what Marina was talking about. Female names are often forgotten, and the men's names stay. There's a lot of politics in the way our memories work. Why Auguste Boal? Because he's a white man, and everybody remembers him, and he did a great job. But this missionary nature that I have to be the one, I have to preach, I have to bring it to the provinces, bring the good practices. I think there is something uh, like this is a fuse, a bomb fuse. This is what teams need to resist. However great the ideas, the formats in terms of delivering the ideas is important. You need to come up with other formats of co-creation. Marina, there is still a lot I want to say myself, but we are almost out of time. We do have simultaneous interpretation till 3 p.m. We must have questions from our audience, and we need to leave some time to answer the questions from the audience. Tamara, I'm watching the chat, and as usual, there are more comments. People want to share their opinions or to share their experience. And I think we've covered a lot of the questions in the first part of our talk. And now this is more of a theoretical discussion. Should we go back to specific questions? Who who was the one to begin this horizontal theater in Russia? Uh, the origins uh, of the contemporary um, stage in horizontal theater. There's questions about ethics. There's a question on, well, depending how the performance was creating in a vertical or a horizontal format, what impact that has on the creative quality, the product. Marina, yes, we talked about that. Tamara, yes, I agree. These things were already covered. Marina, Ada, it's an interesting question. Oh, this movement of horizontal theater, when do you think it became relevant to Russia? What year are you thinking? Do you have like a milestone? It's hard for me to identify, to pinpoint. Maybe 17? Well, Russia is part of the global process as far as I see it. I wouldn't talk about Russia separately. I know that collaborative practices, they stem from street theaters, theaters of an improvised nature. When there were no directors and people would come up with the performance together. And then there's a lot to do with physical theater when there are no directors, with people through their bodies come up with collaborative performances. These are also forms that existed at the beginning of the 20th century that were very popular. And then 17, a lot of politically charged movements. And then the 70s, and this is what Andrei Moguchi was said. I've tried that. I've tried all of your formats. We did see attempts the reason why it's becoming particularly relevant today is because there is a lot of verticalization of the political power in the country. There is a request for artists to come up with alternative practical models, not just abstract. They want to try to build a different statement, not through compromises, but through consensus. And these are different formats. Marina, I absolutely agree with you in terms of the political situation, talking about historical. Um, well, when you talk about horizontality, when you try to tie in with the medieval theater, I think that would be false because, of course, if we look at the history of the theater, the figure of the director came to the fore, and it was a very important milestone when theater recognized itself as an independent form of art, and that came hand in hand. Prior to directors coming to the fore, this figure, this important personality coming to the fore. Before that, w- it wasn't at a personal level that theater was created. It was a tradition that was directing like the rules of the genres or of a specific theatrical style. They played the function of a director. They were above the personality, above the individual. When the director comes to the fore, the theater is taken to the personal level. And this is a new era in the history of theater. Theater starts to perceive itself as something that's independent from literature and other forms of art. What we're living through now is not going back to street theater, street performances.
Это попытка а, какой-то
It's an attempt to build an alternative to the theater paradigm that was formed um, hundreds of years ago. And when you talk about theatre, you need to specify that when you mean European theatre, because other traditions, Marina, yes, of course, I'm only talking about European theatre. If we talk about global theatre, we won't be able to encompass everything. So now we're talking about Western European theatre. Tamara, what else? Tamara, an organizational question. When we talk about European, well, we talk about the Netherlands experience. These horizontal groups emerge on their own, initiated. These are always small groups of people that are on the same page, and then later through rehearsals, they assign somebody as a director among themselves, and they are not aiming to be for the big stage or the conventional stage. They tend to be. They choose the black boxes. They choose the small spaces. And that's a divide because, well, somebody wrote, when you talk about theater in Russia, it's always the director who comes to a theater, a traditional a theater with their own new principles. It was just a comment. Marina, well, okay. Tamara, well, this will have something to do with the financing mechanisms because, well, a small team that comes together can get some grants to enable them to exist. Marina, yes, of course. Tamara, are we going to conclude this generic um, discussion that's been streamed? And are we going to ask our Russian case guests to join our Zoom conference? Perhaps they have any more questions to ask. Marina, at 3 p.m., I need to disconnect. Tamara, well, perhaps we can, perhaps they have questions to some of our participants. Perhaps our participants wants to share something. If not, then let's go. Let's do that. Let's conclude the formal part of our discussion. I shared all of my thoughts and ideas, all of my surprises and hesitations, everything that I feel and think about this new reality that I think is emerging. I have to insist on the fact that it's been around for forever, and now we're just recreating the past. I think what we're evidencing is a tectonic shift in art as a whole and in theater in particular. And I don't think we can underestimate the scale of this shift. And it would be absolutely natural to try to rationalize it, conceptualize it. Of course, we have our concerns. Of course, we have our hopes tied to it. And it's absolutely right. And it would be totally silly to pretend that nothing is happening. Something is happening. Perhaps it's happening for the better. Perhaps it's happening for the worse. Perhaps it won't lead to anything, as the proverbs go, but it is happening. The fact is undeniable. Okay, then let's now say goodbye to those that have been joining us through social networks. And we will continue our talk with a smaller number of participants here in Zoom.
Ну вот, приятно всех видеть, как мы и договаривались.
Great to see you all. As agreed, we've got our international guests. So if you want to ask questions to